I'm Warren Smith with World News Group, and this is the latest edition of our new Christian Voices series. Today we're featuring Brian Brenberg. Brian Brenberg is not your typical college professor. Growing up, he was sports obsessed, and in college, he played football. But while an undergraduate, he was introduced to the conservative economist Milton Friedman, and he began to understand economics, business, and entrepreneurship as powerful forces for creativity and good in our culture. That growing understanding changed the trajectory of his life. He earned an MBA with distinction from Harvard's Business School and a master's in public administration from Harvard's Kennedy School. I flew to New York City to interview Brian Brenberg, where he teaches finance and economics at the King's College in Lower Manhattan. He teaches students looking for careers in business and entrepreneurship. I caught up with Brian and had this conversation about business and life. Brian, first of all, tell me a little about yourself. Where are you from and where did you go to school?
So I'm from Minnesota originally and grew up there, went to the University of St. Thomas for undergrad, and then went to grad school at Harvard Business School and the Harvard Kennedy School.
So you have an MBA
Yes.
and a master's in public administration.
Right,
That is not necessarily a trajectory to become a college professor.
Not at all.
When did you decide that you wanted to be a college professor?
So that really came about almost accidentally. I was actually in Washington, D.C. after grad school, and I was working at a charitable foundation that supported some academic institutions, including the King's College, where I am now. And I thought King's just sounded like a fantastic place, but I really knew nothing about it. So I sent a resume up here and just said, I'm interested in what you do. I don't know what that means, but I would love to talk. And I got a phone call from the provost the following Saturday. We talked for about an hour, and he said, why don't you come up and interview for a professor position? I had no desire to leave DC at that point, but I thought there's nothing to lose. So I went up to King's, gave a lecture, met the students, met the faculty, and really just sort of fell in love with the place and felt like this is where God's calling me to be. And so the professor decision was really more of an experiment than it was a decision.
So when you came up here, though, to teach economics and entrepreneurship, business, change management, and related topics, it was in a way, though, of a piece with what you had trained for
Yes.
up until then, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I was finding as I was in the private sector, I was working in finance, I worked in medical devices for a bit, and then public policy research. What I found was that my real interest was trying to understand this context or this system within which entrepreneurship and business enterprise happens. And so that sort of interest, I think, naturally lends you or moves you toward an academic context. And so I think, yeah, the interest there had been building for a while, and then the opportunity sort of rose unexpectedly. But I found pretty quickly that there was a great fit between where I was sort of going intellectually and what King's allowed me to do.
So Brian Brenberg, here we are at the King's College. Over your shoulder, out that window,
Right.
and down a block or two is Wall Street.
Yeah.
You're teaching college students, Christian college students for the most part. Do they come here maybe with certain kinds of baggage about business? The Gordon Gekko,
Yeah.
greed
Yeah.
is good, and that business is all about greed mentality. And what do you do to dispel them of those ideas?
Right. I think students come here with a very complex understanding of business. On the one hand, I think they recognize that we, in America especially, we live in this context of plenty. We have all sorts of things that make life easier and more livable and enjoyable, and those are the result of things that businesses have created. So on one hand, I think they appreciate the material plenty. But on the other hand, I think there's this sort of absence of significance. So yeah, I can create a lot of things, I can make people's lives easier, I can make people's lives more convenient, but how meaningful is it really at the end of the day? So I see a lot of students coming in, on the one hand, understanding that markets work, but on the other hand saying, but I don't know how meaningful they are, or whether I can find a passion in pursuing a career in the marketplace. And so what I really try to do is I try to show them that markets fundamentally aren't about producing things. Markets aren't primarily about trying to make money. Markets really begin with somebody's insight that they can serve somebody else, that they can make somebody else's life better. And so I try to push students to understand that what happens in the marketplace every day is really just people trying to serve one another. And there's an awful lot of purpose there.
Brian, what are some of the things that you do, that you say, or you exercises perhaps that you walk your students through to help them understand that entrepreneurship in business could be a worthy vocation for a Christian?
I think one of the best things you can do is to get away from talking about capitalism from 10,000 feet or markets from 10,000 feet or even things like entrepreneurship from 10,000 feet. Those look like they look big and they look scary and they look impersonal when you're at that level. But if you go down to the individual entrepreneur level, you look at the guy in the street, you look at the woman who started a business, and you really dig into what it is they're sacrificing, what it is they're doing, how it is they think about their customers, how it is they think about their employees, you realize pretty quickly this is an amazingly complex set of relationships. And it really is focused on how can I make somebody else's life better? How can I find a way to create value and certainly capture some of that value, right? But you begin by actually creating value for someone else. So what I try to do is bring them down to that ground level and help them see real people doing real things.
And whenever you do that, I guess you would discover, at least in a few cases, that, man, these entrepreneurs are really special people. They're heroic in a way, aren't they?
Absolutely. They have so much courage. They have so much faith. They have so much humility, frankly. You have to be bullheaded to be an entrepreneur, but you pretty quickly realize you have to recognize what it is you don't know and where you need help from somebody else. So I think the really interesting thing about entrepreneurs is when you look at them, you sort of can immediately identify with them. You identify with their hopes and their dreams, with their struggles and their hardships. And you become a little bit more sympathetic to them as entrepreneurs. And as a result, I think you start to appreciate the wider system of capitalism or markets in a way that you maybe didn't before.
Brian, in our conversations with each other, a couple of times you've talked about creating value, adding value, serving others. Right. I think that there is a popular myth in our culture, played out not very far from here at Zuccotti Park with the Occupy Wall Street movement, that if I am making money, I am necessarily taking money from someone else. Yeah. And the idea of value creation, of wealth creation, doesn't seem to be a part of that understanding of economics. Whenever you have kids come to you, to your class, who come with that understanding, what do you say to them to help them understand that when someone is getting wealthy, when somebody is adding value, it is not taking money or value from someone else?
Yeah, I love this point. This is one of the favorite things I have that I can talk about in my classes. We sometimes have a tendency to look at the world like the things that we have, the things we're working on, the resources that we're working with, we're sort of fixed at the beginning. And at this point, all it is slicing the pie in different ways. And so I think that's why people get so concerned about inequality, because they feel like, why are the pie slices so different? What I try to show students is the resources we're working with, the opportunities we have, the products that we're thinking about trying to sell, these things didn't exist in the beginning the way they exist now. Somebody had to create them. Somebody had to have an idea and pull resources together and make something new. It's fun to take students back and say, 20 years ago, here's what the world looked like. If you wanted to do X, here's how you did it. If you wanted to buy something, you didn't go on a tablet through Amazon. You went into a store. Okay? The world has changed now, right? Because somebody had an inventive idea. Now, the guys who are running Amazon or Apple or whoever, are they making a profit? Absolutely. But why are they making a profit? Because they expanded people's opportunities. They have changed the world in ways that most of us can agree largely are beneficial, right? And so they're taking some of that, they're taking some of the value they've created, but they've left a whole bunch of it for us.
And the way all of this, I guess, in a way relates to a Christian understanding of the world is, if we go back to the beginning, in the beginning, God created, we're made in His image, so we are made to be creators.
Absolutely. This is just such an enlivening thing to understand, that creative impulse you have is there for a reason. It really means something. I think a lot of young people look at the world, and in a lot of ways I think they get sort of bored with it, or there's a lot of cynicism about what's happening in the world. And yet within them there's this sort of longing to do something significant and creative. And Christians can come in and say, absolutely, it's there for a reason. It's a reflection of the being, the creator God who made you. And it's there because Your job is to discover something new about His world. He gave us this job to fill the earth and to subdue it, to make it useful for people. But part of that job is discovering how to do that. You notice in the Bible, He doesn't lay out a plan for how to do that. Here's how you develop these resources, and here's how you develop these resources. He just says, do it. But He's given us this creative capacity, and so we become these great discoverers. We're adventurers in this world trying to understand what we can make of it. I think for your average young person coming into college, if they can start to grasp that, it just changes the way they view opportunities in their life.
And what you're saying, I think I hear you saying, is that you don't have to be a musician or an artist or a painter to have that adventure, to have that creative impulse satisfied. You can do it in the world of economics and the vocation of entrepreneurship or business.
Absolutely. We so narrowly define what it means to be creative. So often we put constraints on ourselves and we say, well, if you're not a musician, if you're not a poet, if you're not a filmmaker, you're really not in a creative enterprise. But the truth is, all of the companies that serve us with products that we love are full of creative people. They're not maybe making music or films or writing poetry, but they're creating new processes for people to work together. They're creating new ways to get things done. They're thinking about how to build something out of real, tangible materials that can serve another person. That takes immense creativity. So I think one of the tasks for Christian educators, especially those of us in the marketplace, is to help people understand that creativity is not bounded by the arts. Creativity cuts across all sorts of different disciplines.
Brian Brenberg teaches in the business capital of the world, New York City, just a couple of blocks from famed Wall Street itself. So we took a break from the conference room where we had set up for our interview and took a stroll down the streets of Manhattan. You know, Brian, it's common to talk about academics and their ivory tower, and even you referred when we were talking indoors about, making things not abstract but concrete. Well, it's tough to get any more concrete when you're talking about business than being right here at the corner of Broadway and Wall Street.
The great thing about being on Wall Street, really the great thing is you get to rub shoulders with the people who are in this business. I mean, so many of the decisions about how we allocate capital in our world, how we fund businesses, how we fund schools, how we fund just about any enterprise start and end here. And so you get a chance when you're studying in a place like this really to meet the people who are making those decisions and think about how they're making those decisions. You also get to take part in some of the biggest social movements that we have in our day. This area is a hotbed for protests and for activism, and so the big ideas around capitalism and markets in some ways are being hashed out here, and our students get a chance to participate in that.
Well, Brian, while the ideas and the business activity are pretty hot here, I'm getting cold. Why don't we go back inside?
Sounds like a good idea.
Professor Brenberg lectures regularly for the Foundation for Economic Education and serves on the Faculty Advisory Council for the American Enterprise Institute's Values and Capitalism Project. He lives just a couple of blocks from the King's College campus with his wife, Krista, and their 3 children. Still, teaching at King's remains his first priority. Mentoring a new generation of Christian leaders, his passion. Brian, I want to shift gears on you a little bit because a part of what you do here obviously is mentoring the next generation. You're a young man yourself, but the folks that go to college here are younger still. What are, in that process of teaching and mentoring younger people, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What is unique about this generation coming up right behind you?
I think students in this generation want to be entrepreneurial. I think students in this generation want to do something significant. They want to do something creative. And the problem is they look at their world and they feel like everything's sort of already rigged, or the boxes are already there. And if you're going to do something in the marketplace, you have to climb the corporate ladder, you have to check the box. And there's just this desire to do something outside of those traditional spheres. What I find is just helping them see that the world isn't predetermined. The world isn't, it's not already carved out and you've got to fit yourself into it. There's an awful lot out there that people haven't discovered. There's an awful lot of places where people can make a difference and we just haven't found a way to do that yet. And so my job really when I'm counseling them is just to help them see the possibilities beyond the 3 or 4 or 5 things that they think are really the only avenues for an ambitious or successful or smart person.
When you were coming along, when you were the age that they are now, what were some of the influences, books, people that made a difference in your life?
Yeah, you know, I was very different from the typical King's College student when I was their age. I went to college at the University of St. Thomas and largely went there to play football, really. And schooling was something I knew I had to do, had always worked hard at school, but for me it had been something where you sort of check the box. Okay, I have a science class, do the best I can, get an A, great, check that box. Philosophy class, doesn't matter what the subject is, just work hard, figure out what you need to learn, get the A. Students here come in, they're much more creative, they're much more energetic, they're much more curious than I was. But that changed for me, you know, junior, senior year in college. There's a man I met who was a successful businessman in Minnesota. And he sort of took an interest in me from the standpoint of being a football player. He was a football player himself, so was I. And so we got to know one another. But he really challenged me to think about what it is I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And it was kind of funny. He just started feeding me articles and books. And most of them would just sit under my desk at college and I wouldn't read them. Until one day, he gave me a book. It was by Milton Friedman. This is sort of the classic story of getting a book by Milton Friedman. It sounds cliched, but I get Capitalism and Freedom. And actually, I didn't read it, but one of my football teammates did. And at a dinner a couple months later, when both I was there and this teammate with this mentor of mine, my teammate said, I read the book, I really liked it, and they started having this conversation. And I got jealous, and I thought, well, if he's going to read the book and have this conversation, I should do that too. So I read the book over the summer when I was working at an insurance company, and it gave me a sense that there's a world to understand. Life is not about checking the boxes. And so I started to get interested in what are the cause and effect relationships in our world. And that's sort of what Capitalism and Freedom led me into. And once you kind of find one angle into it, then all of a sudden other worlds start to open up. So you start becoming interested in history and political philosophy and theology because you're asking these big questions about the world that I just hadn't asked before.
Brian, we're calling this video series the New Christian Voices series because guys like you are fairly young. You're emerging as leaders on the Christian scene. Hopefully you'll be a leader for a very long time, 5, 10, 15 years from now, maybe 25 or 30 years from now. Where do you want to be? What do you want people to say about your career when you and they look back on it?
Well, from the standpoint of an economist and somebody who thinks about innovation and how the world changes, those questions about 25 or 30 years, I always have to say, I can tell you I have no idea what the world's going to look like. So it's very hard to say, you know, how am I going to add value in that world? But I do think there's a couple of things that I want to get better at. One is I want to get better at sharing ideas that move the world. You know, these ideas about do markets work? Does liberty work? What is liberty about? Do property rights work? You know, what does an entrepreneur do? These are big questions. I think they're going to stick with us for generations, for decades, certainly. I'd like to get better at articulating the case for these things. And I don't know what format that's going to take. It's going to be television. It's going to be probably not radio as much. It's going to be internet, web stuff. That's what I'd like to be a part of. So I want to be making the case for some of these big ideas. And I want to continue to educate future generations. Again, the world of higher education is going to change. We don't exactly know how, but we know it's going to change. My goal is just to be in a position where I can continue to participate in that process. People are going to be learners forever. People are going to be teachers forever. Where's that world going to go? How can I be a part of it?
Being in New York City means that Brian Brenberg is close to the nation's major media outlets. So it's no surprise that he's appeared on MSNBC and the Fox Business Channel. And he's written for publications such as USA Today, Forbes, and World Magazine, among many others. Given his passion for investing in the future leaders of business and industry, it's hard to imagine that Brian Brenberg's influence will not only continue, but grow over time. Reporting for World News Group's New Christian Voices series, I'm Warren Smith.